What's up again there, guys? Brian here, the 3 Topics Gamer, here to share with you another awesome ranking video to share with you guys today. Now, for those of you that have been watching my channel for some time, you already know that I've already done a worst to best video tackling the PlayStation consoles. So if you haven't seen that video, I'll be sure to leave a link to it in the description down below. But heck, it must be said that before I became a PlayStation man, I was a Nintendo kid, so I think I'm more than qualified to do a worst to best ranking of all of the current Nintendo consoles. Now, if you haven't already, please, I would really appreciate if you give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to press the subscribe button if you want to see some more awesome content from me, because I've got a lot of projects that will be coming out over the next 2 weeks. And also one more thing. When it comes to the ranking of the Nintendo consoles, I will not be acknowledging the handhelds. We're going to be doing the handhelds in an entirely different video. And also, I will not be also acknowledging the Nintendo Switch, simply because, as I've said many times, I don't know what that thing is. Some say it's a handheld, some say it's a console. You gotta pick your poison. You can't be both, in my opinion. Now, some people say you can be both, but I'm more of a traditionalist. You either are a handheld or a console. I prefer to keep them separate. But heck, if they want to try to mix the two, well, then it's its own unique different thing. So it doesn't belong in a console or a handheld comparison. So we will not be acknowledging that. So with that out of the way, here we go. We will be starting off with the 6th and worst Nintendo console, that in my opinion. So don't be too sour if you actually happen to enjoy these early consoles. So with that said, let's start off with the worst Nintendo console. And it just so happens to be...
Coming lowest on my list, and undoubtedly the worst Nintendo console, is the Wii U, which to this day had one of the shortest lifespans of any console to date. In my opinion, the Wii U was a clear example of Nintendo's own arrogance and overconfidence. After having the massive success of the Wii becoming the best-selling console during the 7th generation of console gaming, Nintendo was on top of the world and thought that they could simply do no wrong. So they thought that just by creating a slightly more powerful and oddly modified version of the Wii, that they could simply get a head start of the competition ahead of the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 during the 8th generation of gaming consoles. Unfortunately for Nintendo, this backfired very quickly for them, as the Wii U was plagued with problems both hardware and software-wise. For starters, the gamepad was proven to have a very short battery lifespan, and its user interface had multiple problems, and there were even several reports of the gamepad having problems connecting to the actual console itself. It also didn't help with the lack of software quality-led titles for the Wii U, and it had a very weak set of launch titles, and throughout its lifespan, it did not experience much third-party support, as publishers were already gearing up for games to be developed for the Xbox One and PlayStation 4. With a very poor first year of sales and the initial development of the Nintendo Switch beginning not long after the Wii U was released, as the PlayStation 4 alone would eclipse its entire lifetime unit sales by only its 2nd year. As big of a Sony supporter as I am, I have no problem testing out the competition, and in my personal experience, while I could easily see why the Wii would appeal to an audience that typically was never originally interested in playing video games, that cannot be said for the Wii U, and it was discontinued just a few months before the Nintendo Switch was released in 2017, which to me gives it more than enough reason to place the Wii U as the lowest and worst Nintendo console on my list. Ranked 5th on my list might not surprise many of you, as I am pulling a complete 180 and going from the worst selling Nintendo console to the best selling Nintendo console, as the 5th place spot has to go to the original Wii. Now, I just want to come out and say right now that unlike the Wii U, I do feel that the Wii is not at all a bad console. Motion control was really a big thing during the 7th generation of gaming consoles, and Nintendo made a brilliant decision creating a motion control focused console that could appeal to a much bigger audience and even get a large amount of people who weren't typical gamers interested in trying it out. My biggest issue with the Wii is simply the fact that I am not a fan of using motion controls for every game. There are some games that work well with motion controls and others that don't. Now, if you allow me to get a little bit personal about how I actually ended up buying a Nintendo Wii.
Now, I'm going to be completely honest. The only reason that I even purchased a Nintendo Wii to begin with was due to one man. And that man just so happens to be Michael Jackson. I wanted to play this game so bad that I purchased a console specifically just to play this game. I was not interested in all the typical Nintendo franchises. However, little did I know that to my heart, if I had just waited 6 months later, it was going to be released on the PlayStation 3 anyway, and it would actually look and play better, and even have, I believe, 1 or 2 extra songs. I can't really remember. So now I was stuck with a console that I no longer needed, and on top of that, all of the other games I was even slightly interested in playing were going to come out on the PlayStation anyway. I mean, heck, if I had Michael Jackson, I was obviously going to get the Just Dance games. I mean, by this period of time, DDR had pretty much died out at home, so I would have to go to an arcade in order to play a DDR game. So heck, if I don't no longer need to have the Wii in order to play dance games, I could just stick to playing the Move. And the same would also be said for all of the other third-party games that I was interested in playing on the Wii. So games like Dead Space Extraction, Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles, or Resident Evil Darkside Chronicles. These are games that I actually thought would work on the Wii that were just going to come over to the PlayStation thanks to the Move. I think the on-rail shooters was really the Nintendo Wii's strength. But heck, now that I've got the Move, I no longer needed it. So I was stuck again with a console that I no longer had any use for. So I eventually just gave it away to some kid that was living in the neighborhood, and I'm sure the kid had a fun time. But heck, it just became an obsolete system and I no longer needed it anymore.
With everything said, even with its incredible success, looking back on the Wii, with the Move still being relevant with PlayStation, and with me always going back and turning my PS3 on to play some motion control focused games, there is just no reason for me to give the Wii a second try. By this point, I had mainly checked out of all of the primary first-party Nintendo franchises, so the Wii was never appealing to me ever on its own, which is why I would place it 5th on my list. Ranked 4th on my list has to go to perhaps one of the most important video game consoles ever made. As the video game crash of 1983 hit, the world of gaming was devastated, but at the last minute in 1985, Nintendo came and brought it right back to life with the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, in truth, this system was really just a remodeled version of the Famicom that was only ever really known inside Japan, but it is just what the world of gaming needed. Coming out during the 3rd generation of gaming consoles, the Nintendo Entertainment System is the very definition to me when I hear the term retro gaming, though some folks a bit older than me might think of the Atari 2600 instead. Most of the iconic Nintendo franchises that are still going today, like Metroid Prime and Legend of Zelda, were started here. And while Mario did make his first appearance in the 1981's Donkey Kong, and even had his own arcade cabinet in 1983 in terms of Mario Brothers, it was really on the Nintendo Entertainment System to me where Mario would become a legend, and to this day still remains the most iconic video game character of all time. While future generations of gamers may never play this console or even have any interest in visiting the past, for me personally, it is always going to be a part of being an important piece of gaming history, which is more than enough reason to give it the number 4 spot on my list. Number 3 on my list goes to what I would consider to be the last Nintendo console that I actually enjoyed playing on, and that was the Nintendo GameCube. Coming out during the 6th generation of gaming consoles, it competed against the newly arrived Xbox and the extremely successful PlayStation 2. And while it did end up selling less than its competition, I think that the GameCube did a respectable job at continuing the gaming traditions that Nintendo is known for. I think that the overall design of the console was very true to its name, and it had a very strong library of games, and I actually really liked the controller design. The GameCube was also ahead of its time, being the first console to allow you to connect to its handheld counterpart, as using a link cable could actually allow you to connect your Game Boy Advance to your GameCube, which is a function that would not be repeated until the following generation between the PlayStation 3 and the PSP. Where I think the Nintendo Cube failed was due to its lack of features. In a way, it made a number of similar mistakes to that of the discontinued Sega Dreamcast made, one being the disc. The GameCube's discs were mini-sized for the console, and therefore it was not able to play standard DVDs and audio CDs, and I do believe that during this generation, we were beginning to enter a period where in order for a console to survive, or even be successful, it needed to be able to do more than simply play games, which to me made the Nintendo GameCube the last of the pure gaming consoles. But despite all of this, the GameCube still holds a place in Nintendo history of continuing the long line of strong gaming platforms, which to me makes it more than deserving of the number 3 spot on my list. Number 2 on my list has to go to the very first Nintendo console that I ever actually owned, and still do to this day, and that is the Nintendo 64, or N64 for short. The N64 was the ultimate example of being able to make the transition from 2D to 3D gaming perfectly. Competing against both the PlayStation and Sega Saturn, the Nintendo 64 continued the chain of providing a wonderful gaming experience with an exceptional library of games that are still highly enjoyed to this day. However, it's also a little sad to say that just like the GameCube could be considered the last of the pure gaming consoles, the Nintendo 64 would be the last gaming console to use cartridges, as both the Sega Saturn and PlayStation were using discs. Super Mario 64 was a launch title, and to me is still my favorite Mario game of all time and will always remain in my top 10 favorite video games of all time. Other popular Nintendo franchises also made the transition to 3D very well, like The Legend of Zelda, and this generation will also bring classic titles like the Super Smash Bros. Games and continue the very popular lineup of Star Wars games like Shadows of the Empire and Rogue Squadron. And even a number of impressive racing games would come, and who could possibly forget the infamous Conker's Bad Fur Day. The Nintendo 64 was also unique in the sense that it was the first console that I can remember to actually come in multiple different colors, and the same would go for some of its game cartridges as well. Now, the Nintendo 64 was by no means perfect, but being the very first console that I ever actually owned, did provide me with a set of standards that I still follow to this day, and out of any Nintendo console that I've ever played, this is the one that I have the most memories that I can remember playing, giving it the number 2 spot on my list. Number 1, and my favorite Nintendo console of all time, has to go to the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or SNES for short. While the Nintendo 64 was the first console I ever personally owned, the SNES was the first console I ever played, and is the very reason why I am still a gamer to this day. It all started here. While the original Nintendo Entertainment System undoubtedly saved the world of gaming, the SNES took everything the original did and cranked that baby up to like a 20. Everything was improved upon here. The graphics were better, the music was better, the controls were better. Hell, when it comes to its games, it's my opinion that the SNES has the strongest library of games of any Nintendo console, even the Switch. It outsold both the Nintendo GameCube and the Nintendo 64, and the only reason that perhaps it didn't sell as many units as the original Nintendo did was because it was in the midst of a fierce competition during the 16-bit console war going up against the Sega Genesis, or Mega Drive as some people call it, which compared to the SNES is also a very strong console and the strongest console Sega would ever create, and it too has a very strong library of great games, which thanks to these two consoles made the 90s an incredible decade for gaming. And on a personal level, this still remains, after 30 years, a top 5 favorite console. And in some ways, I think I have more of a personal connection to this console than any PlayStation. If it weren't for the SNES, I never would have begged my parents to get me an N64. I never would have made the transition to PlayStation. Hell, I might not even be talking to you now because the 3TR or 3TG channel would not exist. I may have become a mostly PlayStation gamer in recent years and have decided to stay away from modern Nintendo, but I will never, ever reject my Nintendo origins, as it sits at the very heart as for why I became a gamer to begin with. And that is something that Sony can never take away from Nintendo. And it all started on this console, which is why the SNES will always remain my favorite Nintendo console of all time.
And that concludes my ranking of all of the Nintendo consoles going from worst to best. I'm sure some of you guys aren't surprised by some of these results, but maybe some of you guys would. Now again, this is just my personal opinion, so please do not fear too sour that certain consoles are placed in specific positions. But now that you guys know my ranking, I'm pretty sure that a good amount of you that are around my age probably had a good amount of experience playing Nintendo consoles in your youth. So I would love to hear how you guys would rank the Nintendo consoles. Please share your list with me and everyone else in the comments down below. And again, please do not forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to help us grow the channel so we can actually do more fun activities like this. And stay tuned because over, I believe, the next, I'd say, week or so, a lot more of these type of videos will be uploading in rapid fire sensations. So stay tuned for that. So, like always, I want to thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll see you next time.